He had watched 300 winters come in off the ocean. Not metaphorically. He had stood at various windows along the north cliff of Revenholt and watched the fog roll in before dark every November for 311 years, and found that it did not change very much. The fog arrived. The season turned. The town contracted around itself like something pulling a coat closed. He went to the concert. He had not missed the opening concert at Aldenvane Hall in 3 centuries. Not once. The hall itself had been a granary when he arrived. Stone walls, cedar beams, the particular smell of sea salt and stored grain that had persisted through 3 renovations and was, he was fairly certain, now part of the molecular structure of the building. He'd had a hand in the first renovation. His name appeared in the founding committee records under a slightly different spelling, the way names drift over time, the way rivers move, and no one had ever thought to ask why the committee's most significant donor had, as far as anyone could tell, never aged. He arrived at 7:45, the way he always arrived, through the side entrance the staff used, up the stairs to the sealed balcony on the 2nd level, through the door whose lock he'd fitted himself in 1943. The balcony held 12 seats and had not been open to the public since he'd closed it. The view of the stage was perfect. No one had been in the balcony in 80 years. Someone was in the balcony! Not a seat seeker, he could see that immediately. She was sitting in the 3rd row with her back slightly to the stage, her laptop open on her knees, a coffee cup on the seat beside her with a ring of dried coffee beneath it that suggested she'd been here for some time. Dark hair, dark coat, the particular quality of attention of someone who wasn't paying attention to anything in the room because the thing demanding her attention was on the screen. The temperature in the balcony dropped by 2 degrees. She didn't notice. He stood in the doorway for longer than was reasonable. He was aware that the reasonable thing was to announce himself. He was also aware that he had been standing very still in doorways for 3 centuries, and that reasonable was a concept that required recalibrating slightly for his particular situation. He watched her type. He watched her pause, reread something, delete a sentence. He watched her push her hair out of her face with the particular impatience of someone who has done this motion 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more, and has never found a satisfactory permanent solution. He hadn't watched someone do anything ordinary in a very long time.
You heard me enter, but you still did not look.
20 minutes.
Concert starts in 20 minutes.
She hadn't
if you're
looked
looking
up.
for a seat.
She typed the sentence in the same breath as the words, both happening simultaneously, with the efficiency of someone who is managing 2 things at once and not apologizing for it. He noticed the coffee cup had a logo he didn't recognize, which meant it was a recent business, opened in the last decade, and therefore she was not from here. He said nothing. He went to the far corner of the balcony, the seat he had always used, the one with the best sightline to the door as well as the stage, and he sat down and he watched the orchestra set up below, and he listened. Not to the orchestra, not yet. He had heard 10,000 heartbeats in 300 years. He had learned, after the 2nd century, not to listen to specific ones. He'd had good reasons for that rule. He'd kept it without difficulty since the winter of 1891. He kept it now for approximately 4 minutes. Then something about the specific frequency of her pulse, or the rhythm of her typing, or the way she exhaled very quietly when she found a sentence she liked, he wasn't certain which one it was, made him stop not listening. 300 winters, not one of them unexpected. She left before the intermission, not in a rush, gathering her things with the methodical care of someone who always leaves a space as good as she found it. He watched her go. She nodded in his direction on the way out, the way you nod at someone sharing a waiting room, acknowledging their existence without requiring their involvement in anything. He'd been in this town for 170 years, and no one had ever looked at him that precisely without flinching. After the concert, after the hall was empty and the lights were low, and the stone walls held the last vibration of the strings the way stone holds warmth, he went to the wall where the photographs hung. The hall's history, framed in sepia and black and white. He'd walked past them for decades without stopping. He stopped. The photograph from 1883, a man at the piano, the hall in its 2nd iteration, the gas lamps making everything amber and soft. He could see the daylight ring on the 2nd finger of the man's left hand. He'd seen it 10,000 times. It was his own hand, his own photograph, his own ring. But now he was seeing it the way she would have seen it. The founding committee's plaque below the photograph, the date, the man's face. She had been sitting here long enough to see the photographs. She went back 2 days later for her reading glasses. This was the official explanation. The reading glasses were in her coat pocket, had been there since she'd thought she'd left them, but this discovery only arrived after she was already in the car with the engine running, at which point she had two choices. She could admit she was driving to an empty concert hall at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night for reasons she hadn't categorized yet, or she could maintain the reading glasses story and accept that the reading glasses had simply been in an inconvenient location. She maintained the reading glasses story. She was a very good professional. She was catastrophically bad at herself. The hall was dark except for the stage, where a single work light threw a pool of amber across the left side of the piano. Someone was playing, not performing, playing the way you play when you think nobody can hear you. Something that wasn't a piece she recognized, something that had the shape of a piece without having been finished yet, or the shape of something so old the recordings hadn't survived. She stood in the main hall doorway for a while. The music had a quality she couldn't name, a kind of practiced sorrow, the way grief looks when it has been carried so long it doesn't look like grief anymore. Just an approach to the keys, a particular pressure, a very specific set of choices made by someone who had made them before. She knocked on the door frame. The music stopped. He looked toward the door. She could see his face clearly. The work light was in his favor, not hers. And she noticed, with the specific attention that the reading glasses story was failing to account for, that he looked neither surprised to see her, nor entirely sure what to do about it. These were, she would later realize, two different things.
I know what you are.
And you're not afraid?
He waited. She came in and sat down in the front row and said nothing. He turned back to the keys. He played for a while. She listened. The hall had the specific acoustic quality he'd built into it. Every note arriving at the front row seats with exact clarity. Nothing lost, nothing distorted. After 20 minutes, she said,
What is that?
Some Swiss, something I've been working on.
He paused, not considering whether to answer, she thought, but considering whether to answer truthfully. Then,
Tell me. Please.
Please.
Yes.
she laughed. It wasn't a planned laugh. It arrived the way things do when the official story runs out and the actual situation becomes briefly visible. The sound of it did something to the room, to the acoustics of the room. He heard it arrive at the back wall and return, the way sound does in old stone spaces, but also to the other thing, the thing he'd been managing since the night she nodded at him on the way out. His eyes went gold before he could stop them. It happened fast. The amber burned out from the center, replaced by something that was genuinely bioluminescent, visible even in the low stage light. The veins at his temples darkened slightly. He put both hands flat on the piano keys to ground himself and did not turn toward her. 53 years of control. 53 years of not letting it reach his face in front of anyone. She'd laughed at something he said, and the door had come open 3 inches. He heard her stand. He did not hear her run. He heard her approach. She was behind him, not close enough to touch, but close. He could feel the warmth coming off her, the specific warmth of a human body that was 37 degrees and alive and not afraid. Not afraid. He turned around.
There you are.
I didn't think you'd come.
Not what are you, not that's not possible. There you are. The way you say it to someone you have been looking at and suddenly seeing. He didn't know what to do with that. He had spent 3 centuries learning what to do with fear and nothing like this. She lost her footing on the step down from the stage. The stage floor was 3 inches higher than the main hall and the edge was unmarked, and she'd been focused on his face rather than her feet. He moved before the thought had finished, one hand at her elbow, keeping her upright, the contact brief and cold, colder than anything she was expecting. His skin was cold in the way that stone is cold. Not the cold of someone who'd been outside, but the cold of something that didn't generate warmth by default. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. His eyes were amber again now, just amber. He released her immediately. Neither of them moved. The hall was quiet. Outside, the fog was in and the harbor was dark, and the town had contracted to whatever it contracted to at midnight in November. And in here, there was the smell of old stone and cedar and her coffee and the faint mineral cold that arrived before he did and remained. He had been careful for 53 years. He'd had reasons. He was standing in the concert hall he built, in a town he'd lived in for 170 years, holding very still, while a woman he'd known for 4 days looked at the color of his eyes and said, "There you are," like it was the most natural thing in the world. And he didn't know, for the first time in a very long time, what was going to happen next. He was going to have to find out. Harvan Drest arrived on a Thursday. Casimir felt him before he saw him. The specific quality of a presence older than his own. The way the temperature shifted differently when the person carrying it outranked you in years. He was at the piano when Harvan opened the side door of the hall without knocking, which was Harvan's way of noting that locked doors required his permission to function, not the other way around. Harvan was tall, gray-haired, wearing the particular kind of dark coat that suggested someone who dressed in a decade and had not updated since. He looked 63. He was 840. He moved through the hall without looking at the stage, which was the Covenant's way of noting that the hall and everything in it was Casimir's only through an arrangement that continued at the Covenant's pleasure.
This is the account of an unregistered witness bond. I have delivered it, and I have received it.
I did. You didn't answer. I find it more efficient at this point in our acquaintance to simply arrive.
The conversation was formal and brief and very precise. Harvan did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said what he'd come to say. The Covenant had been aware of an unregistered witness bond forming in Revenholt territory. Casimir had not disclosed. This was a violation of the 200th year Covenant protocols. He was not angry. He was the way an ocean is. Not angry, just present, and considerably larger than whatever was standing in front of it.
You cannot.
What Casimir didn't expect was Soraya. She had been in the hall's back office when Harvan arrived. Budget projections for the spring season, the kind of work that required a good internet connection, and a space where no one played the piano at her. She came into the main hall to get her coat. She saw Harvan. She saw the quality of the room, the specific way the temperature had dropped, and the light seemed to have been rearranged without anyone touching it. She looked at Casimir. He looked back. She went very still. She made a decision. She sat down in the front row, not hiding, just declining to be dismissed. This would be reported to Harvan's intermediary, who would find it alarming. She thought of it as good posture. She went to find Murray afterward because Murray was the person in this town who the building records said had been here almost as long as Casimir, and who ran an apothecary that smelled inexplicably of vervain and old paper, and someone who had been paying attention for a century. Mireille set the small amber jar on the counter between them. She said,
"Vervain. It grows near the harbor path. I keep it in the window boxes. Not for him, specifically. For the ones who come through that aren't him. He doesn't need to be protected against. But it doesn't hurt to have it around."
It's potent. Are you ready for this? You sought vervain. I've been keeping it ready. Take it and be careful.
Burns them if they try to compel you. Blocks the reading, the impression they get from skin contact. Makes them less certain of you, which is a useful thing to have available. Pause. He hasn't used compulsion in 60 years. He won't use it on you. But now you know what it's for.
Soraya put the jar in her bag. Then she said,
You said it was just an herb. So why does it burn you? What's a
Murray paused, not surprised, just readjusting. She said the word the way someone says a word that means something technical and also something devastating simultaneously.
When a vampire of significant age begins to listen specifically to one person's heartbeat, really listen, not just register, the bond forms whether they intend it to or not. It's not compulsion. It's not even conscious. He hears your heartbeat in every room you're in. He will hear it, specifically, for as long as you're alive. After that, he carries the absence. Pause. On the positive side, you were the most interesting thing to happen to this harbor district since 1926. I know because I was here.
harbor district.
Casimir came to her flat at 8 o'clock as he'd said he would. He stood outside the door. She could hear him standing outside the door, which was itself a thing she was adjusting to. Her hearing had not improved, but her sense of the space directly outside her door had. She opened it. He said what he'd come to say. He said she should go back to the city when her contract ended. He said this in the even tone he used for things he had decided and found he couldn't entirely mean. He said it the way the Covenant had trained him to say things that were correct. She listened. Then, he didn't answer. She held the door open. She said, He stopped. He looked at the threshold, not theatrically, but with the specific attention of someone for whom thresholds are not metaphors. She watched him understand that she knew what the question meant. She said it again. The exact same words, the exact same tone, with the difference that this time she said them knowing. And here is where you should subscribe if you haven't yet. Because what he decides, what this costs both of them, nobody gets a rehearsal for. New stories every week. Don't miss what comes next. He stepped across the threshold. 311 years. The last time a threshold had done that to him, she had been a woman named Vesna who had died in the summer of 1891 and whose heartbeat he had carried as a silence for 60 years after. He had been so careful. He had managed the distance. He had not sat in a person's kitchen and drunk tea and listened to them tell him about their grant application for 3 hours since before the radio existed. He walked home through the fog at 2 in the morning. He didn't think about what it cost. He knew. He'd always known. He just hadn't known it was already done. She renewed the contract in December. 1 year, renewable. The grant came through in February. Not because of anything extraordinary, just the specific, unglamorous work of someone who understood the system and was very good at their job. The hall was funded through the following spring. She signed the paperwork in Murray's back room over tea because the apothecary had become the place she went when she needed to think, and the harbor was too cold, and her own flat had the quality of a place where she'd been having too many feelings. She saw Casimir when she saw him, which was not as often as she'd expected, and more often than she could account for professionally. He was there at the hall when she worked late, he was not there when she was there with other people, and this distribution was not random. She'd stopped pretending she didn't know him well enough to notice. Harvin left in January. She didn't know the specifics of what that meant for the Covenant's position. Murray was informative on general principles and careful about details. What she understood, the bond was registered now. There were conditions. Casimir had agreed to the conditions. She was not asked to agree to anything because the Covenant had no jurisdiction over humans in the matter, which was its own kind of statement. She thought about it sometimes, in the way you think about things you've decided and are not undeciding. The bond was permanent. Not because she couldn't leave Revenholt, she could and had briefly in February for a conference, but because what had locked was not geographic. She would, at some point, age. He would not. The specific frequency of her heartbeat would be in his listening landscape until it wasn't, and then it would be gone, and he would keep existing. She found she could hold this knowledge. Not easily, but accurately. She'd spent 3 years not being in the present tense with anyone, and it turned out the present tense was where she wanted to be. He came in November. She was in Aldenvane Hall for the opening of the season, not in the sealed balcony, which she'd never been back to, not as an audience member exactly, though she'd stopped thinking of herself as exclusively the logistics person somewhere around March. She was in the main hall, front row, laptop open, one of those situations that is definitely still work, but has expanded its definition to include being in a beautiful space at night, when the lights were low and the stage was being set up, and the musicians were warming up in the side rooms, and the whole building had the particular alive quality it had when something was about to happen. She didn't look up from her laptop. She said,
Concert starts in 20 minutes.
He stopped. She could hear him stop. She heard, in the new way she had of hearing him, the specific shift of someone for whom time operates differently, processing something that was both expected and not. She looked up. He came down the center aisle. He sat down in the seat beside her. Not the balcony seat, not the managed distance of the corner, the seat next to her, in a lit hall in the middle of an organization she ran and a life she lived. He didn't say anything. She went back to her laptop. He watched the stage. She reached over and moved the coffee cup off the seat between them, the one she'd put there without meaning anything by it, and he looked at that, the small cleared space, the available seat. He said nothing. She said nothing. The musicians filed in below. He had been in this hall for 311 years. He had sat in the balcony and managed the distance and let things move past him the way water moves past old stone. He had been very good at this. He sat in the front row of the main hall, next to a person whose heartbeat was now part of his permanent auditory landscape and did not manage anything at all. It was the most difficult thing he had done in a century. It was also, in the way of things that cost you, the only thing that had felt entirely worth the cost.
Concert starts in 20 minutes.
She had come to Revenholt for 3 months. She'd been careful, professionally, about the grant deadline and the hall's funding cycles and the specific terms of a renewable annual contract. She'd been catastrophically imprecise about herself. The reading glasses had been in her pocket the whole time. He had been here 300 winters. He would be here 300 more. She would not. He sat down beside her anyway. The concert started.